Hello and welcome to the Apiary. This is Jake Beeman with Golden Fox Farms. We are on the back half of February and we are already having some early spring management questions come in. Matter of factly, the state apiarist is in my county today, and I was informed they got into a lot of colonies that already need reverses done. And that really drives us right into early spring and spring management. This time of year, and your approach can set the tone for the entire rest of the season. There's also some management traps that we should discuss. The primary concern remains, does the colony have enough food? March is historically when colonies starve, when their brood outruns their stores, and they can't make up for it foraging because they're locked in by weather. With an early spring, these problems creep into February. So we're going to start encountering that sooner than we normally would. As you saw in prior videos, I'm very intentional in my feeding and having colonies interwinter with sufficient weight, where most colonies will not have any problems develop. I can continue to monitor their weights from outside the hive and identify anyone in trouble. And really, this is just an issue for colonies that went into winter light or big booming colonies that already have a pretty substantial population. I personally, I don't like digging around in colonies this early in the year. It really is too early to be doing this. It's just we're being forced by it by the weather. Because beyond feed issues, we usually don't have many problems that we can deal with this early in the year. But we can induce all sorts of problems. Like beyond finding they're starving, like we can find a disease condition, but there's really not very many options for most disease conditions this time of year. We shouldn't find a varroa condition this time of year, but we can induce problems. We can roll a queen and take a colony out of service. Rolling a queen in mid-February when we usually can't get queens mated for another 10 weeks, that's going to destroy that colony. So long story now, on the whole, I still try to stay out of colonies in the spring, but this year's kind of playing my hand. I need to get into some of these and see if we're in trouble, see what management we need to do. That said, you might not have been blessed, as I am, with colonies going into winter with enough weight, or colonies that are dependent on sugar feed up top. You might also just have hungrier colonies. The fix here is simple. Weigh colonies and check top feed. A colony at starvation weighs around 35 pounds in a single and 55 pounds in a double. But remember, that is in my average equipment, and your mileage may vary. Don't wait until they are at starvation to feed. As a colony gets stuck, they can easily burn 8 pounds of feed a week, roughly a pound of food a day when they're rearing brood. I usually seek to keep colonies around 20 pounds above starvation ranges in the spring. That gives me a little wiggle room and keeps me from clogging them up before the flow hits. But this is also a somewhat intensive management choice and can backfire if we have an extended bad weather spell. Bees will take liquids over 55 Fahrenheit, but require solid feeds for cooler temperatures. Should you feed syrup and patties? This is one of those questions that will have a lot of different answers depending who you ask. There's a lot of disagreement. Light syrup, 40% syrups, 50% syrups will stimulate colonies to brood up faster. It can also induce swarming earlier. I find swarmer the bigger problem management-wise in the spring. My colonies usually come up to strength without me adding anything to them. So rather than risking inducing an earlier and more intensive swarm season, I just omit the feed. When we talk patties, I should also note, I omit feeding for stimulus. If they're going to starve, feed them. When we talk patties, today we're either talking about a fondant type thing or a spring patty, a pollen patty this time of year. The fondant patties are interesting. The foo-foo ones with all the essential oils, I should say, not medications, but the essential oils. They may garner health benefits. We really don't understand. I haven't really seen great conclusive third-party evidence for that, but there's a lot of people that like them. And I'm not going to say don't use them. I'm not going to say use them, but realize they're an option. Pollen patties are somewhat similar. There's something I reserve for colonies that need a brood boost, but there are some serious questions about pollen substitute and if they improve bee health, or if they cause problems. Frankly, a lot of pollen substitutes are mostly soy flowers. The bee gut is not intended to digest soy flour, and that can actually cause some problems. I don't really have a great answer to whether we should be feeding pollen patties or not. In my own personal view, my choice to use them in low brood hives is addressing a specific problem and makes more sense to me than a prophylactic application that might induce issues in an otherwise healthy colony. When do I remove insulation and feed? When the weather tells you to. Feed needs to stay on until risk of starvation passes. And that means the bees are putting away enough stores for you to cancel their feed insurance. Take it off the top of the hive. Insulation has a similar answer. I take mine off when I super colonies, though you can argue insulation should be kept on all year. Lastly, there's reversing colonies, and this might be the most hot-button issue we'll look at. Reversing is the act of taking the upper box and lower box and swapping their positions. What that does for you is theoretically it puts open comb over a clogged brood nest. Now, there are fans of this technique. There's people that really don't like it, and they both have good arguments. Like many things in beekeeping, there's a time and place for it, and we can examine that. First off are the reasons not to reverse. It doesn't happen in nature. It can be disruptive to the brood nest. It means moving heavy boxes and manipulating hives, and if I don't have to do that, I don't want to do that. And bees will move down given the opportunity. Some people also note that when the cluster's at the top of the box and the heat goes up and hits that roof, they're kind of in a heat well at the top of the box, and that's lost if you move them down or put stuff over them. That said, in a naturally occurring tree hive, theoretically that ceiling's farther up than where the brood cluster is, and that's not occurring there, but the whole hive is generally more insulated than these Langstroth things will be. But here's the big thing. It can defer swarming. And for most of us, that's something we want to do in the spring. Some of us don't. Some of us, with more naturalized approaches to beekeeping, are okay with swarming and will just leave the colonies unfettered and let them swarm. And they'll have their swarms in our area first week of April. Older beekeepers will tell you that's your honey crop flying out the door when they swarm. But also, there's been a lot of changes in the past 40 years of beekeeping when we did those studies that said that, including Varroa. And with bees responding to Varroa by swarming in naturally occurring colonies, I don't know who's going to come out ahead at this point. I myself still do swarm control, especially during certain times of the year, and this is going to be one of those years that's intensive for it. When done right, reverses should be minimally disruptive to brood nests and can delay swarming. This is particularly important for colonies coming to strength early and getting swarmy when weather conditions aren't stable enough or good enough for virgin queens to get mated afterwards. And that is a big issue with these early springs. The colonies brood up early, they get strong early, they swarm early. But even though spring on the whole is running early, it is usually punctuated by some significant cold fronts that park on top of us. And if you have bad weather for a week, you can wipe out that whole queen's opportunity to get mated. And now you have a bunch of colonies that are hopelessly queenless. For me, reversing is reserved for those colonies it is perfect for. If I find a double colony where everyone is in the top box, or I have a colony getting swarmy and it's warm enough to split up the brood nest. For the double with everyone in the top box, if I wish to keep running it as a double, I can just do a classic reverse. And that gives bees drawn comb above the brood nest where they can evacuate food and keep that brood nest full of brood and not get nectar or honey or pollen bound. If I'm interested in reverting that colony to a single for honey production, I can just take the empty deep out of the bottom and drop down that top box and then super up and have pretty much the same effects. If it's a swarmy colony, When it is warm enough to split up the brood nest, doing a reverse can push the clock backwards and buy you time. Done right, a reverse places open comb above or in vicinity of a brood nest, and it's in a direction the bees are keen to move, which is up. Bees will descend, but they also like going up when the opportunity avails itself. This reverse, possibly combined with some frame shuffling, gives the queen more area to lay and the bees better places to move stores. I have had colonies hanging early queen cells, and a reverse and some frame management resets that swarm clock in that colony, and the colony scrubs their own queen cells afterwards. That said, there are times reversing is definitely contraindicated. If we have brood in two boxes and it's still cold, when we reverse that, we're going to isolate the two hemispheres of brood from each other. And simply the bees don't have enough workers to keep them at the temperature they need to be at. Brood needs to be around 95 degrees to develop properly. And when you split it like that, you're going to chill a lot of brood and have a lot of mortality. Also, if we're still feeding, you don't want to do a reverse. Most winter feeding is done at the top of the hive. And if the bees are on the top box under that food, they can access it. If you do a reverse and move that cluster of bees down here and put an empty deep between the brood nest and the food, when we hit cluster temperatures again, they're going to get isolated from the food, and that is a fatal condition. As with all things in beekeeping, make your moves with purpose. Don't reverse all your colonies just because you think you are supposed to. Stay out of hives unless you have something specific to do, and that could be a health check, that could be a manipulation, whatever, but make sure you're actually getting into hives with purpose. Equally, don't throw away a useful tool just because it's not a fit for every colony. As always, manage to your bees' needs, and they will reward you. Good luck and happy beaking. I also need to make sure I don't roll that queen when I put this hive back together. That queen is towards my left hand. I'm going to sneak this back on down.